Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for Classics in Context. I'm Felicia Richardson, your moderator. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's event, the Dr. Elizabeth Fletcher Deshawn Charitable Trust. And of course, I'd like to thank you all for being here. Shaina Phenix is a queer Black poet and teacher from Harlem, currently working as an assistant professor of English at Elon University. Her work centers on Blackness, home, and the stories we pass down from generation to generation. She received a BA in Poetry and Africana Studies at Hampshire College and holds an MFA in Poetry from Virginia Tech. She is the 2021-2022 recipient of the J.C. and Ruth Hall's Poetry Fellowship at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And her work, To Be Named Something Else, was the winner of the 2023 Miller Williams Poetry Prize. Her work is always in communion with documents that recall many Black and femme experiences, the passing down of stories, the ocean, the body, mothering, acts of loving, and homes. One of the works that her work is in conversation with is For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough by Ntozake Shange. And that's the work we're going to be talking about today. Ladies and gentlemen, Shaina Phenix.
In the spirit of this work being a choreopoem and something that is meant to be heard in this space, I want to open us up with the first poem in the choreopoem entitled Dark Phrases. Dark phrases of womanhood, of never having been a girl, half notes scattered without rhythm, no tune, distraught laughter falling over a Black girl's shoulder. It's funny, it's hysterical, the melodylessness of her dance. Don't tell nobody, don't tell a soul. She's been dancing on beer cans and shingles. This must be the spook house, another song with no singers, lyrics, no voices, and interrupted solos, unseen performances. Are we ghouls, children of horror, the joke? Don't tell nobody, don't tell a soul. Are we animals? Have we gone crazy? I can't hear anything but maddening screams and soft strains of death. And you promised me. Somebody, anybody, sing a Black girl's song. Bring her out to know herself, to know you, but sing her rhythms, caring, struggling, hard times. Sing her song of life. She's been dead so long. She's been silent so long. She don't know the sound of her own voice, her infinite beauty. She's half notes scattered without rhythm, no tune. Sing her sighs, sing the song of her possibilities, sing a righteous gospel. Let her be born and handled warmly. Thank you.
So I performed this choreopoem many, many years ago, and this particular piece speaks to me as little girls not being allowed to be little girls, little Black girls being made to be grown up before they're ready, and putting things on little girls that little girls shouldn't have to deal with. Don't cry. Don't trigger, for lack of a better word, the teenagers to full-grown men that you might encounter. They're given a lot of responsibility, and they don't just get to be little girls. I even hear now someone will refer to a little Black girl as a princess, and it was actually on a social media post, and someone else chimed in and said, she's a queen. And my thought was, well, why doesn't she get to be a princess? Why doesn't she get to do the little girl thing of being a princess? And I think your work speaks to that also, the having to grow up before you're ready and being forced to, not just by society, but maybe by the people who surround you because they're trying to protect you, but it's having an adverse effect on you as a child. Are you, is that a personal experience for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think girlhood and Blackness have really complicated relationships with one another because there is this fear from people who are raising us that we don't kind of end up right certain ways. And so we get these rules about our bodies, about the ways that we exist in the world that expect for us to kind of show up as full-grown, full-developed, fully thinking, fully present humans, because that is what is thought will protect us. And I think what I'm kind of trying to do in the work, what I think Ntozake Shange does in For Colored Girls is highlights that there is nothing that could have been done. There's nothing that can prep us. There's no amount of forcing us to grow up fast that can kind of protect us from the things that we'll encounter by way of our girlness, by way of our Blackness. Those things kind of feel like they're going to be there either way. So definitely, I think out of love, out of fear, I was definitely pushed to be woman, by 8, woman by, kind of woman by 13, kind of woman by 17. And that made it complicated. I think even as an adult now, my relationship to understanding my childhood is complicated because it feels a lot like I was, grown up in child and grown up in child. I always describe my kind of inner child as like half, like she has pigtails, but she's also like has a fully developed body and is walking through the world in this kind of split space.
And having to learn to react to things as a grown-up. Mm-hmm. Like as a little Black girl, you're taught how you should react when a teenage boy who knows full well that you're 10 years old acts inappropriately to you. And rather than having the recourse of being able to go to another adult and that adult be the one to protect you, you have to learn to protect yourself. You have to learn to reply in such a way that it will hopefully shut that teenage boy down because nobody has told him that he is acting in an inappropriate way to this 10-year-old girl. I also wanted to ask you about a poem that you wrote regarding violence toward young Black boys. But the point of that poem was, for me, is what about the young Black girls? Mm-hmm. What about, a young Black girl disappears and we may not know anything about it. Mm-hmm. One gets murdered and we don't know anything about it. And I'd like you to speak to that a bit, please.
Yeah, so in undergrad, I wrote a choreopoem that was deeply in conversation with For Colored Girls, in that it pulled from the kind of bare bones setup that Ntozake laid out in For Colored Girls. There was an interviewer who was to be me as an adult and me as a child, asking questions of women who ranged in ages, kind of about existing, about living, about how we show up. And there's a poem in my collection called Trance that is a part of the choreopoem, and it basically does what Felicia pointed to. It's just that it's a protest poem in which the women are in a kind of trance and they're chanting without thinking, "Stop killing our boys, stop killing our boys." And they're naming all the boys, all the men who have lost their lives to state violence. And the speaker is kind of trying to wake them up and saying, yes, and what about the girls? Yes, and do you know the names, right? Do you know Ayanna Stanley Jones? Yes, and right. Do you know the women, the girls who are also here, who are also dying, and dying because of state violence, and dying because we're on the front lines fighting on behalf of the boys, of the men. And yeah, so the poem tries to kind of think through the complexity or the nuance, and just even how sometimes I feel like Black women are asked to show up as fighters, as protectors, as frontline people, and also don't get to be people who can also be harmed, people who are also being hurt, people who are also being victimized in ways that other people or our other counterparts are.
And it sort of asks the question, okay, who's going to speak up? Who's going to speak up for us then? Mm-hmm. I think Shange touches on that in some of her work too, that we are as important, we are as fully formed humans as the men who affect our lives. I'm not going to necessarily say the men in our lives, but the men who have an effect on our lives. And I was reading about For Colored Girls, and there were some Black men who got very upset about this because they thought that she was writing an indictment against them, and it really wasn't that at all. They were placing importance on themselves that was not warranted, because she wasn't not only not writing about them, she was not thinking about them. She was writing about Black girls and Black women and their existence in the world. Or did you find that to be true also?
Yeah, I think there in her foreword of this version of the book, she actually addresses that kind of the backlash from men kind of feeling like it was a sort of indictment or a sort of finger pointed specifically at Black men. And I think what the beauty and what offered me the freedom to be able to kind of sit down and write poems and have a book of poems was that Shange was the first person that I can recall saying, we get to just be, we just get to be living, and we get to be dancing, and we get to be talking about the hard things, and we get to be telling secrets, and we get to be, and all those things make us worthy of being alive. Just like having things in the way that other people do are the things that make us worthy of being alive. It's the first time that I feel like the lens was just turned right toward the girl talk on the stoop. The lens was turned toward sitting at the table. The lens was turned to, little girl in the kitchen, and her grandmother got the hot comb on the oven, on the stove, and she's pressing her hair for church. The lens was turned there, and it was okay to be there. She made it, she didn't mystify it, or she didn't make it supernatural. She just literally turned the lens toward us. And I think that people were upset because we don't get the lenses turned toward us, especially for just mundane, everyday things. Those lenses have not been for us. And I think it was frustrating to people, for Black men, to other people, just to say, I'm not in the frame right now of this whole long production of time in which I'm just in the periphery, and I don't know how to deal with that.
When they are coming from a space of, they have these spaces that maybe we're not allowed into, and then they become upset when we make our own. We made our own spaces, and we haven't said that you're not allowed there. We haven't said that you can't come in, but it's clearly not for you. So here we are in our space, and just let us be. Just let us enjoy that.
Yeah, let's have it.
Exactly. Are you ready to move on to your next poem?
Oh, sure. So there's another poem in this collection entitled Somebody Almost Walked Off with All My Stuff. And it is something that, one of the poems in here that I feel kind of stuck to my bones, because it is this woman kind of thinking through how a love kind of threatened to take her from herself, how being in a situation with this man that she's kind of speaking toward, but greater, just thinking out loud really about what the effects of almost losing herself are. And it's a demand for herself back. It's a demand for her. She's fighting for herself. And I think, yeah, I come back to it when I also need to be reminded to fight for myself.
It turns out that this is a favorite of both of ours in this work.
Somebody almost walked off with all of my stuff. Not my poems or a dance I gave up in the street, but somebody almost walked off with all my stuff. Like a kleptomaniac working hard and forgetting while stealing. This is mine. This ain't your stuff. Now, why don't you put me back and let me hang out in my own self? Somebody almost walked off with all of my stuff and didn't care enough to send a note home saying I was late for the solo conversation or 2 sizes too small for my own tacky skirts. What can anybody do with something of no value on an open market? Did you get a dime for my things? Hey man, where are you going with all my stuff? This is a woman's trip and I need my stuff to ooh and ah about. Daddy, I got a mainline number for my own shit. Now won't you put me back and let me play this duet with the silver ring in my nose? Honest to God, somebody almost run off with all my stuff and didn't bring anything but the kick and sway of it. The perfect ass for my man, and none of it is theirs. This is mine. Ntozake got her own things. That's my name. Now give me my stuff. I see you hiding my laugh and how I sit with my legs open sometimes to give my crotch some sunlight. And there goes my love, my toes chewed up, fingernails, nigga with the curls and your hair, Mr. Louisiana hot link. I want my stuff back, my rhythms and my voice. Open my mouth and let me talk you out of throwing my shit in the sewer. This is some delicate leg and whimsical kiss. I gotta have to give my choice without you running off with all of my shit. Now you can't have me less I give me away. And I was doing all that till you run off on a good thing. Who is this you left me with? Some simple bitch with a bad attitude. I want my things. I want my arm with the hot iron scar and my legs with the flea bite. I want my calloused feet and quick language back in my mouth. Fried plantains, pineapple pear juice, Sun Ra and Joseph and Jules. I want my own things, how I live them, and give me my memories, how I was there. You can't have them or do nothing with them. Stealing my shit from me don't make it yours, makes it stolen. Somebody almost walked off with all of my stuff and I was standing there looking at myself the whole time.
So this is almost, no, it's not almost. It is, whereas also it's a protest and it sounds to me like a celebration at the same time. Mm-hmm. Because I'm demanding that you give back my stuff because I have realized how important it is to me and how I have allowed, or almost allowed, someone to steal myself from me.
That almost feels like the most important part of that poem. That I think the almost sometimes gets lost in the, in the protest, in the realization of the poem. But the almost is literally to say, I arrived at some ledge and I caught myself. I saw myself maybe for the first time, or I saw myself again, right? I didn't fall first, right? This is not a poem in which I'm picking myself up off the floor. This is a poem for the ledge that I almost fell over, but I didn't. And that almost feels empowering, that almost feels kind of gut-wrenching, because I think we don't get a lot of right before it happens, right? We get the before it exists, and we get the after. You know, when I got to pick my girlfriend up off the floor because somebody broke her heart. But we don't get the right there, right? Where I'm like, I almost fell, but I realized, right, this is my shit, right? I want it. I don't need for you to keep pulling from me. I'm recognizing that I'm okay with me.
Right. and I'm not going to let it happen again.
Yeah, yeah.
Are any of your poems in direct response to that?
Oh, yeah. I think off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the pantoum in which Keisha gets her due. So I write this poem in which there's a old movie called Belly, in which there's this woman, Keisha, who's kind of just a periphery character, this Black woman, one of the most beautiful Black women I've ever seen. I remember being a child and most definitely not supposed to watch that movie. But I remember seeing this woman and being like, she was dark skinned, and a lot of times they shot her in the movie with this like blue light over her, which almost made her look just kind of like otherworldly, like she sparkled. And I remember, again, as a child who had no business watching the movie, I think I remember being so frustrated, especially as I got older and revisited the movie, with how she was treated. And I know that she wasn't important to the storyline. Like, she kind of was just the girlfriend of the main character. But I remember thinking she deserved so much more, because she did something for me and a bunch of Black women and Black girls with just her being there. And I think I wanted her to get more. And so I wrote this poem in which she gets her due. And it's kind of in her voice, and it's a persona in which the camera pans to her, the camera is on her. She's moving through interactions with her lover, and he's learning to care for her body, and she's realizing kind of similarly, she's realizing her own value, she's realizing the power, the fire in her own kind of sensuality. And that was my kind of reclamation of, the character, but also myself, right? It's a persona, but it was for me. It was my voice, her voice, a bunch of our voices. I was hoping for it to be.
It's wonderful. I recall feeling that way watching shows when I was small, and I'm much older than you. So the shows I was watching were taking place in the 70s, and I've rewatched some of them recently and did not realize the agency some of these women had because they were not main characters. Mm-hmm. I watched when I was small. I alternated between wanting to be Wonder Woman and Christy Love. Mm-hmm. So I watched Christy Love, the movie that I think started before the series began, and I was just floored by how amazing she was. And I was thinking, well, no wonder I wanted to be her when I grew up, but I didn't realize the message that I was getting. I just knew that I was a small child and I didn't see people like me on TV. Mm-hmm. And here she was, and she was awesome.
Yeah. And then also that's the question of, who do we aspire to be? Sometimes who do we have to aspire to be because of what is available to us? And I think that sometimes goes beautifully, and then sometimes, it goes, right? Like, to aspire to be Keisha from Belly in the way that she was written has so much complexity and so much kind of things to unpack. Right. And I think, this Shange did that, where it's like, that we just get to be a whole spectrum of kind of people. Even though, right, thinking just as Black women, this is the first time we just got to exist kind of stretched out, and there was no kind of point to there being some monolith of experience. There was no pointing to there being some right way to be or wrong way to be. The ugly things were there, the beautiful things were there, the connective tissues were there, and everybody was open or able to be a bunch of different versions of people. The women as colors make space for you to find selves all through here, and you don't get stuck, right? But I think if there were character names that might shift some, they feel like one person's in ways, but I think the colors say you can pull this, like this can be part of your experience, this can be a part of your experience, this over here can be a part of your experience, this can be your dance, this can be your song, this can be your sorrow, and like you can kind of in the end, you put together a self from all the women, from all the voices that are there.
Exactly. And you were talking about dancing, and I was remembering how much dance there is and it's not just one of the colors. Several of the women have profound experiences that had to do with watching somebody dance or dancing themselves or dance as a metaphor. And you have that in your work as well. You have dance as a metaphor, actual dancing, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I think that, I think the Black femme kind of body, right, and not as one body, but just a kind of many kinds of bodies, are, I guess, and I'll speak for my own work, but because of how, we are socialized, because of a lot of the ways that we grow up and have these kind of rigid or interesting understandings of body, I think that all of my writing lives somewhere and is kind of obsessed around understanding something about the body, and what better way than to be either observing movement, to be in movement, to be kind of thinking about the ways that we can kind of transcend or shift what lives in here by like getting it out, right, by moving it out. And I think that was something when I wrote my own choreopoem in conversation with For Colored Girls that I was big on having in there. I had some kind of, in the production, we had praise dance, we had kind of a slow dance number, we had just some swaying that all the women found ways to kind of connect together. Because all these words are specifically, yes, like they live in books, but, I think Shange knew, and I think I followed, tried my best to follow in her footsteps, knowing that the words don't just exist the way that we exist. The words can't just exist on the page. Like, they have to live in here, right? We have to like move them through us for us to know or to be able to tap into what they're meant to do for us.
Like with the tambourine?
Yeah, the tambourine is something I struggled with. I'm a musical person. I love to dance, but I grew up in the Black Baptist church, and all the women in my family happen to be the kind of tambourine people of the church. So when the choir is singing, they're like, pass Jada the tambourine, pass Brandy the tambourine. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to play the tambourine. It ended up being a whole poem in my book because it was something that I just was like, I can't figure out. And I think I started to, it became a thing about my identity and feeling like I was kind of separated from the women I was connecting to and trying to navigate what that meant, that I couldn't do this thing that they all could do seemingly naturally. But in the ways of this kind of community, the ways that things come together when Black women are together. I sat in my mother's living room and she handed me a paper plate and she played the real tambourine and she just made me mimic her movements. And then she handed me the tambourine and it happened. And I think had we sat down and she gave me step by step, first you do this, then you do this, I don't think it would have happened, but I moved my body, she moved her body, we made some energy together. She handed me the tambourine and I played it.
Which I think is how this choreopoem works as well. I was reading it and I was telling Shaina that I was having a hard time just reading it for the words because I had already helped to bring those words to life at one point, and it was very difficult for me to just read it for the words that there were without trying to envision, okay, how did I stage that? How did I help the audience feel that? Mm-hmm. And I think that if the poem has done its job, I think that's going to be true. Yeah. No matter what your experience is as you read it. At some point, you are going to have a hard time reading it without recalling the feeling that it gave you when you read it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that that's the beauty of this work is that, yes, it is on page and you'll kind of turn and read, but I think it asks that you get into your senses, into your body in some sort of way. Like Felicia said, I think no matter what your kind of background or positionality is of coming to the book, I think that you can't, you just can't without getting somewhere in you. This book is full of pockets and windows and little cracks in the wall that are I want to see, right? This book is looking to see certain people, right? Looking to name and give voice to certain people, but there are cracks in the wall, there are windows, there are little alleyways that make space for everybody to find space, to find their bodies, to find some sense in all of it.
I wanted to go back to the Not a Love poem. Is that what those are called? Those 3 works. And it related to something that you were talking to before. I think it relates very much to someone almost walked off with all of my stuff, because each of those poems, I remember one of them in particular, the point of view is of the person who has been nurturing this plant for months, and she has decided that she has had enough. I am not thinking about you anymore. I'm not chasing after you anymore. I am going to leave this plant for you, and I'm putting a note on it telling you where you can go and how to get there, and then I don't want to see you anymore. And I think that relates so much to the someone walked off with all of my stuff. That is told by a woman who had to go chasing after her stuff. And she's got it back and she's not letting it go anymore. And the person who's responsible for that feeling in her, she is kicking out of her life.
Okay, what's your question? Sorry. I missed your question, sorry.
Oh, I hadn't gotten to it yet.
Okay, I was like,
I was talking to spell some I want to know about the instances in your work where your characters have come to that point where I know that you have a lot to do with the way I have been feeling about myself and the unfavorable way I talk to myself, and now I want you out of my life.
Yeah. So in my own work, so Not a Love poem makes me think of, there's a poem called Burning High Bun, remembers who I am. And the poem is literally a poem that it was a created form in which you start with a prose block and then it kind of burns away at itself. You end up with this haiku at the end that kind of, the way I like to think of it, it kind of gives you the bones, the meat of why we're all here, why the poem is here, what does it mean to do? And I think a lot of that poem feels connected to specifically that one Not a Love poem, and that it is me kind of walking through a poem and saying, at some point, right, I thought my love was this, right? I thought my love was an Xbox controller. Like I thought my love was a plastic container that you throw away. And I'm here remembering, and a lot of it is specifically remembering who I come from, and naming, people like my great grandmother, who I look to as kind of one of those people who moved through the world in a way that was super unapologetic, in a way that, at least in my knowledge of her, I've never seen her have to chase her stuff. She was more so, I don't know if everybody in my family is going to be like, why would you tell this story? But my mother remembers having my great grandmother, she had 2 lovers who she would see like at her home at the same time, and she would be like, and y'all better speak to each other, and like would make them say hi to each other. And I feel like, so that poem is kind of moving me through like, me walking through, I thought my love was this, I thought my love was this, I thought my love was this, because, I'm letting these kind of relationships, these kinds of things, kind of turn, like I'm turning them inward and not seeing kind of how I'm showing up, and not seeing what my value is, and not seeing how important my love is, and arriving at the end. The ending haiku is kind of me naming exactly what my love is, in that little tiny bit of word.
So you're finding your agency, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for colored girls throughout is about that, even during these terrible things that happen. The Blue, I think she's the one who gets attacked by her friend, and then or someone that she knows, and then Red is the one who loses her children, right? Is she the one who loses her children?
No, I think Red is number 7. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't think of what color his children. I know it's not Red.
Okay. And it's very interesting because Shange talks about several instances of seeing men dangling their children over a balcony. It's like,
yeah. In her intro to this, she writes about the image is how the poem came to be of the children being dangled out the window by their father. Was because there was an image that was stuck in her head from stories that she had heard, and it was like not one story that she heard. It was like stories I had heard that it was stuck, and so this is how this poem came to be.
Right. And she says she tried to find, I don't know that she said that she tried to find it, but she doesn't want the person who did the terrible act to be seen as a terrible person. She wants his humanity to inform why he did what he did. And we can still be horrified by what he did, but still try to understand what brought him to that point. And in her mind, it's this woman finding her agency. And sometimes people don't want you to do that.
Yeah.
They, which goes back to people being angry with her, men being angry with her for writing a poem that they were not, or writing a work that they were not really in.
But I think something that you said that feels big for this work is that I think if everybody could recognize that all she was doing here was humanizing Black women, like that is really the kind of simplest, right? I don't think there was an aim or like by the end of this Black woman will arrive. She just literally was like, I'm gonna give you some pages of watching us be human, watching us exist as just people, like we just are people. I think everybody who is mentioned is kind of described, all the images of all the people here, they're human. Like they're just, it's really so simply that she just was looking to humanize. Like I don't think there was this big capital letter aim other than to say that we get to be celebrated for being alive.
Right. Like, and these little small moments that happen, like the little girl who loses her imaginary friend at the same time she meets the friend who has the same name. That was one of my favorites also with because I think that may be the only one where there's really a little girl. Yeah. And I really liked that one. But many of her works are just day-to-day things happening, or something that might be extraordinary to the reader, but these are just mundane, everyday, this is how I live my life kind of things that these women are going through.
Yeah. And I think that, again, to the humanizing aspect, I think that this collection and what I think that I try to do in my work, and I hope, that it is in, right homage that I'm honoring her well, is literally just make documents of us like existing, of us kind of moving through the world, of us, going to swipe our bus pass on the bus, of us kind of sitting on the stoop and chatting, right? The kids running through the block party, the fire hydrant, the jumping double dutch, the things that I think would not get kind of celebrated as extraordinary, to make documents that say that all these things that are a part of us are ours, and are worthy of pages of books, are worthy for people to hold in their hands, right? To know, like to know my grandmother's sayings, or to know, right, what it feels like to be a little Black girl in Harlem, or to know what it feels like to be violated by someone that you love or someone that you know. I think so much of this work is, yes, around humanizing, but also just to document. It's a document. It's a document that is full of all the things that we're not allowed to say, the things that we want to say but are scared to, the ways that we want to live, the things that we love, the things that we don't love, the things that we don't understand, right? That battle to find yourself, all those things. It's just a document of as many experiences as could, right, fit in these tiny books.
And I think that's what makes it relatable to anyone who would pick this up and read it. If anyone who reads all of the poems in here are going to find something that they relate to, and on some level, even if it's just where the poems take place. I was very, I really very much enjoyed reading about the ones that took place in Harlem. I was telling you I had gone to New York with a school trip for my daughter, and we didn't spend nearly enough time we spent most of our time riding the subway and walking somewhere. And so by the time we got to Harlem, we didn't get to spend a lot of time there. And I really wish that we had. And I like that Shange and you, for both of you, Harlem is so integral to your experience that it's very easy to just lose yourself and imagine that you are a part of that also.
Yeah. I think place in poems, I think in general, feel helpful to get people's feet on the ground. But I think specifically with this work, in my own work, Harlem is a hub for Black folks, right? Like it's a place that is full of culture and of history and connections. And every block, right? I have a vivid memory on every block. There was a time in growing up where everybody kind of knew each other. And I think it looks a little different now with gentrification and such, but I think that the Harlem that Shange is writing about also is that where everybody knows each other, and we're walking down the street and we will say hi to the people, and there are the block parties, and there are actually people dancing in the street, and there's the guy with the boombox walking down the street, and we all might stop to dance on the way to the supermarket, right? All those things, right? I think looking at place also informs, right, what the poems signal for us to see, what the poems signal for us to be able to feel, and like you said, what they signal for us to be able to imagine, how people can put themselves in or get involved, because there is the creation of community inside the lines of the poems, right? The community is present always in this, and so it feels like a come in, join us. It feels like a like get in here, like come dance, come sing, come say this.
Absolutely. And Shange also writes about St. Louis, where she grew up, but she did spend a lot of time in Harlem. And now, just reading both of your works, I just really want to go back and just really spend some time there without anybody telling me where I should go and what I should go. Go look at this and walk down here and things like that. I would just like to go and just explore it on my own. I think that would be lovely. So is there another poem that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think specifically. I think those were my big two. That somebody walked off. Some other poems that kind of stuck was the, and I don't want to read it because it just is kind of heavy material, but the latent rapists that move into the abortion cycle.
Oh, yes.
That kind of one, having those next to each other feels like that is always a part of the show that feels really deep inhales and exhales, because it is so heavy. But I think that's something that in this felt, kind of earlier, even, I've talked to my elders about it. Something that Shange did with that latent rapist poem was kind of debunk this myth that the only people that can harm you or would harm you are people you don't know, right? That people who would violate you would only be strangers. And it really did kind of complicate that whole kind of cultural passing down. And I don't know if this is true for you, but that kind of what happens in my house stays in my house.
Mm-hmm.
And like there are things that we just don't talk about. And assault, violation, all those are one of the things that it's like, you don't tell a soul. Don't tell nobody, don't tell a soul.
Right.
I think something that she did there was not only say that, predators are not only people that you don't know that wait in alleyways that, will grab you when you least expect it, but they could be people that you know. They could be friends. They could be people who you look to as love, as protection, as all those things. Mm-hmm. And I think the first time I saw that poem performed, I just wept and wept and wept because it felt like such an opening for me. Like it was literally in the middle of somebody's performance, giving me kind of a mouth to even start to address some of those things,
right.
To even start to, right, kind of think back to my own teachings, mm-hmm. right? Being told that like, if there's somebody that you've already been intimate with, then it's impossible for them to rape you, or being told that like, if you went a certain place with someone, then anything that happens after that was fair game, and kind of brought those things up in a way that didn't feel overwhelming or isolating. I think that's something that happens here, is that when things come up, you don't ever feel alone to deal with them. Right? You don't have the people here with you performing around you, right? But there's something about the language that even when you're moving through and navigating and things might pop up, mm-hmm. It didn't feel like I was alone. It never feels like you're by yourself. And that speaks to the kind of nature of community and the whole thing, mm-hmm. Where even if it's like, this is the first time you're looking at this, you're getting this information, and now thinking back to yourself, right? There's a hug in this book. There's a pat on your back in this book. There's a grandmother sitting next to you in this book. There are a circle of sisters who are coming through everywhere in this book, that make sure that everything that comes up, every way that you see yourself seen, is also not by yourself.
Right. Exactly. I think my watch was buzzed. It did. So I think we can do, if anyone has any questions, we can open up the floor for questions now. We have about 10 minutes left before our session ends. Which one?
Yeah.
Read one of yours.
Sure.
Do you have a favorite?
Do you have a thought of?
I like the Pantoum so much.
Which one? The Keisha one, or
yes, the Keisha one. The Keisha one.
It's a little risky.
Is it? Do you have one you prefer? Oh, that one's nice. I like that one. Do that one.
So this is the first poem in the book, and it's called Hydrant Ode, and it feels, I describe it as one of my first love letters to Harlem, but also to girlhood, also to summer. And it begins with an epigraph that just reads, wade in the water, children. Hydrant Ode. See that girl all dressed in red, her rust, her accumulation of trash things gathered round her like a garden, her 3 parts rivering against sun-licked Harlem kids whose giggles make waves in her wet. Ever met a so-and-so's daddy romancing her with a sweat pile tank top and a wrench, asking her to watch his kids while he go down the block and play his numbers? Sometimes she hard to get. Trickle a little and send so-and-so's daddy on his way, water pour. And sometimes she get full of the weeping of a hood summer's souls caught and bodies graved, get full of somebody's mama scrubbing blood stain, of somebody's best friend since shorties with the lit candles at the corner vigil, and she burst. Boutade, billow, bayou on the curb, sea black, and water sparkled young, painted in floral neoprene, supermarket plastic caps, icy red, green, or blue lips crescent, and flip-flops making beats against a parched asphalt getting quenched. She'd then seen a black child or two alive and right before her eyes, then doused them in her blessed faucet spit, then sapped the blood from scraped knees, then washed the face of a wandering toddler hollering because they dropped their ice cream cone in the street, then been a block-side car wash, sink to clean the grill after cookout, been meeting spot for heat wave kisses, been pool when pool gets closed because 12 like us better with nothing to do, been an ocean we brought our own salt to, oil-drenched pastelitos, chicken spot hot wings, Jimbo's fries, tasty seafood fish sandwiches, Funyuns, sunflower seeds, see us, summered in waters most definitely troubled, stubborn and never actually ever putting any fires out, rinsing our summertime heavies down into the sewers. Little black so-and-sos walk through water like we Moses or something. See her all copper and running over like she God a cup or something.
Thank you. I want to just mention one more thing about your work. When I got to the section that was titled, I think it was titled Mother God. And my first thought was, I didn't grow up in the church where when we pray, we say, Father God, but I hear that so much, and it just was, it was refreshing and uplifting to see Mother God written.
The book is about naming, and the sections play with jumping back and forth between the kinds of names that we've been given or we give ourselves or any of those things. And mothers do a kind of creation, right? They do a kind of building, making worlds for little people. And those, kind of putting those next to each other, wanted to play on the kind of, yes, Father God in religion, but also Mother God, also mothers who make, mothers who build, mothers who create.
Do we have any more questions?
I don't necessarily have a question, but I do want to thank you for coming. I was at church with my daughter, and I was singing, "You Gotta Come," and I'm so glad. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, I would like to second that.
Thank you for being here.
Anyone else? Well, I'd like to thank you all so much for coming today. There will be a screening of Tyler Perry's movie for Colored Girls in about 30 minutes. There are copies of Ms. Phoenix's book available. I really encourage you to pick one up. It's one of the most fabulous things I have ever read.
Okay, thank you so much.
And thank you for being with us today. And I really hope that you have an opportunity to come back, and I will be paying close attention for your next collection of works. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.